Today, I'll tell you about a murder case that happened in New Zealand. A farming couple mysteriously disappeared from their home. A few months later, their bodies were found one after another in the river. This case was full of twists and turns, with dramatic plot developments, multiple reversals, and thought-provoking elements. That's why it's known as the most mysterious case in New Zealand history. It's the Pukekohe Bloodhouse case. Background and characters. The case occurred in the 1970s in the South Pacific island nation of New Zealand. The specific location is about 66 kilometers south of the largest city, Auckland, in a place called Pukekohe, near Tuakau Bridge on the Waikato River. The story we're talking about today took place here. Pukekohe has many farms, often adjacent to each other, neighboring one another. Among them, there was a farm operated by a couple. The husband was David Harvey Crewe, commonly called Harvey Crewe, 28 years old. The wife was Jeanette Lenore Crewe, maiden name Demler, 30 years old. They had been married for 4 years and lived on this farm since their wedding. They also had an 18-month-old daughter named Rochelle, born late 1968. Originally, this was a happy family of 3, living carefree at the Crewe farm. However, no one expected that a disaster was about to befall them. The day of the incident. So what happened that day? Who caused this shocking tragedy? Let's turn back the clock to June 22, 1970. June 22, 1970 was a Monday. At 2:20 p.m., the police station phone rang. The caller was a man, his voice full of panic. He said urgently, "They're missing. The house is full of blood, full of blood." The reporter introduced himself as Owen Priest, a farm owner in Pukekohe, also a neighbor of the Crews. His farm was right next to the Crewe farm just a few hundred meters away. At this moment, the call was made from his home. Statement from the reporter. Owen Priest told the police that the father-in-law of Mr. Crewe, Mr. Len Demler, had run to his house, saying something had happened at his son-in-law's home. He asked Priest to come along and check. So Priest followed Demler to the neighboring Crewe farm. Upon entering, they found Mr. Crewe and Mrs. Crewe missing, and the house was full of blood, very horrifying. Under Demler's urging, Priest hurried back home to call the police. Police arrive at the scene. The New Zealand police received the report and immediately dispatched officers to the scene. The lead detective was Bruce Hutton, with assistant Lenrick Johnston. They drove for over an hour from Tuakau to the Crewe farm in Pukekohe. Upon arrival, the police saw the front door wide open. A nauseating, bloody smell wafted from inside. On the front doorstep, bricks, and entrance, there were obvious bloodstains. There was also blood at the doorway, but it had dried, likely left for a few days. After a brief survey outside the door, Detective Hutton decided to enter the house. Survey inside the house. The Crewe house was a single-story building. This was the front door where Detective Hutton and Johnston were standing. Entering led to a hallway. It was near dusk, still light outside, but inside was deathly silent, with a very eerie atmosphere.
Although the floor was carpeted, every step echoed. Besides the bloody smell in the air, there were a few flies buzzing around. Note that June in New Zealand is cold winter, usually hard to see flies. Perhaps the bloody smell attracted these flies. At this moment, Detective Hutton and Johnston carefully observed every detail inside. They found multiple bloodstains on the carpet right at the entrance. Living room and kitchen. Through the hallway was the living room. The TV was on, playing a program. In the middle of the living room was an old armchair. In front of the armchair, on the carpet, there was a long blood trail, like a drag mark. In addition, blood was found on the carpet in front of the fireplace and multiple other places. On the walls, ceiling, and furniture, there were spattered blood spots. On the old armchair in the middle of the living room, there was a sticky mass. Later, forensic personnel determined this was fragments of human brain tissue. Between the living room and kitchen was a sliding door, currently open. Although it was daytime, the kitchen light was on. On the countertop was a half-empty milk bottle. On the dining table plate, there was some leftover fish, but it had spoiled. All doors and windows in the house were intact, although there were multiple bloodstains. There were no signs of a struggle. The rooms were tidy, with no loss of property. Initial assessment. Detective Hutton sighed. Based on the amount of blood at the scene and the human brain tissue fragments left on the armchair, it was judged that at least one of the couple had been killed, and the other was likely in grave danger. Afterward, the police questioned the two people who first accessed the scene, father-in-law Len Demler and neighbor Owen Priest. Len Demler's statement. According to Demler, that morning he received a call from a grain harvest merchant in Auckland. This person was looking for his son-in-law, Crewe, but had called for several days with no answer, so he called Crewe's father-in-law to ask if he knew where Crewe was. Demler's home wasn't far from the Crewe home. So that afternoon, Demler personally went to the Crewe home to see what was going on. When Demler arrived at the Crewe door, he knocked for a long time with no one answering, so he went to the back door, took a spare key from under the mat, and opened the Crewe back door with it. Upon entering, he saw the horrifying bloody scene, got scared, and ran out without thinking much. He jogged a few hundred meters to the neighboring house of Owen Priest, explained the situation to Priest, and Demler then led him back to the Crewe home. At this point, Demler suddenly remembered his 18-month-old granddaughter, Rochelle. So the two of them searched the rooms together and indeed found her on the crib in the bedroom. Fortunately, Rochelle's vital signs were good, and she seemed alive. At this time, neighbor Priest was terrified by the gruesome scene in the house, and under Demler's urging, he quickly ran a few hundred meters back home, picked up the phone, and reported to the police. Additional details from Demler. Demler added that after reporting and waiting for the police, fearing the child was hungry, he found some milk for her to drink. Medical personnel examined the 18-month-old Rochelle and found her nutrition good with normal body indicators. Strangely, based on the blood coagulation at the scene, the incident had happened at least a few days ago, yet the child was not only in good health, but also had clean clothes and changed diapers, so she couldn't have been left alone. Someone must have secretly cared for her.
Priest couple's statement. Mrs. Priest told the police that on the evening of June 17th from 8 to 11 p.m., she vaguely heard 3 gunshots. She mentioned it to her husband when he came to bed at 11 p.m. Priest said his wife did tell him about it, but since he didn't hear the shots himself and didn't think anything like this would happen at the Crewe home, he didn't pay attention and thought his wife misheard. Based on the Priest couple's statements and the newspaper and milk delivered on the 18th found in the mailbox outside the Crewe door, the police inferred the incident occurred on the evening of June 17. However, since the Crews hadn't been found yet, whether dead or alive was unknown, so it was temporarily listed as a missing persons case. Initial difficulties. The police had few clues, bringing considerable difficulty to solving the case. Soon, the news of the Crews' disappearance spread throughout Pukekawa Farms. A witness named Bruce Roddick provided a clue to the police. He said the police announcement that the Crews disappeared or were killed on the evening of the 17th was wrong, because on the 19th, while working at the warehouse door, he personally saw a woman standing at the distant Crewe home door looking into the distance, and a car was parked on the Crewe driveway. Initial hypothesis about the mysterious woman. Was the woman standing at the door Mrs. Crewe? Could she have killed her husband on the evening of the 17th and then faked her and her husband's disappearance? This would explain why someone cared for the 18-month-old Rochelle these days. However, this hypothesis was soon denied by Detective Hutton because forensic tests showed the blood in the Crewe couple's house belonged to 2 different people with large amounts. Rechecking witness Roddick. The police found Roddick again and showed him a photo of Mrs. Crewe, asking again if the mysterious woman he saw that day was the one in the photo. Unexpectedly, Roddick said he didn't know Mrs. Crewe. He only knew it was her home. It turned out Roddick had never met the Crews. He saw a woman at the Crewe door and naturally thought it was Mrs. Crewe. Roddick looked at the photo carefully and said the person's hair in the photo was about the same length, but the color was lighter than in the photo. The police went to the location where Roddick spotted the mysterious woman and found it was a full 100 meters from the Crewe door, making it very difficult to see clearly. Therefore, it couldn't prove that the mysterious woman seen on the 19th was Mrs. Crewe. A large-scale investigation. The police launched a large-scale investigation covering 1. All residents within an 8-kilometer radius of the Crewe farm. 2. Relatives and friends of the Crewe couple. 3. Anyone who had interacted or connected with the Crews. Anyone meeting these conditions was investigated one by one. As the investigation deepened, Detective Hutton had a suspect in mind. Father-in-law Len Demler. This gave birth to the case's first theory, the Len Demler murder theory. Reasons for suspecting Demler. Detective Hutton suspected Demler for multiple reasons. First was the motive. Len Demler had a wife named Maisie Demler, died February 26, 1970, and they managed their farm together. But 4 months before the case, Mrs. Maisie passed away. In her pre-death will, she divided half the farm ownership equally between her 2 daughters. The elder daughter was Jeanette Demler, who later married David Harvey Crewe,
and changed her surname to Lenore Crewe. The younger daughter was Heather Demler, 2 years younger than her sister. After Mrs. Maisie's death, for unknown reasons, in the latest will, she gave half the farm ownership entirely to the elder daughter, Jeanette, while the younger daughter, Heather, got nothing. History of the Crewe Farm. The original owner of the Crewe Farm was the uncle of Jeanette and Heather. 20 years ago, when Jeanette was 10, the uncle died, and in his will, he divided the farm ownership equally between Jeanette and Heather. Jeanette studied in Auckland and was often not with her parents. At 25, she married David Harvey Crewe and returned to Pukekawa. The couple paid in full to buy the younger sister Heather's half-farm ownership, completely owning the original uncle's farm. The Crewe farm scale was one of the largest locally. However, now the sister's mother had passed, and the younger daughter Heather, who had always been in Pukekawa, got nothing. Heather had always been by Demler's side and was his most beloved daughter. What Demler couldn't understand was, with the elder daughter already owning such a large farm, why his wife still gave all the inheritance to the elder daughter, so biased toward the elder and very unfair to the younger. Perhaps this was Demler's motive for the crime. Other suspicious points with Demler. Besides the motive, Hutton found multiple suspicious points on Demler. At the beginning, when Demler came to the Crewe home and discovered the horrific scene, he didn't report directly, but ran a few hundred meters to the neighbor's house. He also didn't have the neighbor report immediately, but had the neighbor go back with him to look, then had the neighbor go home to call the police. Note that the Crewe home had a phone. Why run back and forth? Why not use the Crewe home to report? According to Demler and neighbor Priest's statements, the 18-month-old infant Rochelle was found together on the crib in the bedroom. That means when Demler first entered the Crewe home alone, he didn't think of his granddaughter, but only on the second entry, with the neighbor present, did he remember he had a granddaughter. This situation was obviously very suspicious. During the initial statement, Demler was very nervous. However, he pointed out to the police that the armchair in the living room wasn't in that position before the incident, and he didn't know why it had been moved now. According to neighbors, since Demler's wife died 4 months ago, he often went to the Crewe home for meals. But during the 5 days of the incident, Demler didn't go to the Crewe home for meals or call. Was this just a coincidence? The police asked Demler what he was doing on the evening of the 17th and who could prove it. Demler said after his wife died, he lived alone on the farm, was at home that evening, and no one could prove it. Suspecting Heather Demler. We mentioned Demler's murder motive, which involved the younger daughter, Heather. So did she harbor resentment over her mother giving all the property to her sister after death, then commit the crime with her father? Was the mysterious woman the witness Roddick saw the younger daughter, Heather? With this question, Detective Hutton immediately arranged for witness Roddick to secretly identify her. After seeing Heather, Roddick said it was a bit like her, but couldn't confirm. Afterward, the police took Heather Demler's statement. During the statement, Heather showed strong grief, was very patient throughout, and cooperated in answering various police questions.
No flaws were found in her answers. It seemed Heather and her sister Jeanette had a good relationship with no resentment. At this point, the police investigation stalled. Discovering Jeanette's body. After 2 months, on August 16th, there seemed to be a turning point in solving the case because Mrs. Crewe, Jeanette's body, was found. In a bend of the Waikato River flowing through Pukewawa, the body of Mrs. Crewe, missing for 2 months, was discovered. After the body was salvaged, it was found wrapped in an electric wire, apparently used to tie some heavy object to sink it to the river bottom. On-site divers dove to the river bottom, trying to find the bound heavy object, but found nothing. Subsequently, forensics examined the body and found the deceased had only one wound on the whole body. The wound location was on the head. A bullet entered from the right side. The bullet collided with the skull and fragmented into 15 pieces. These fragments were all embedded in her skull. The bullet was then sent to DSIR, New Zealand's Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, for testing. The result was that the bullet came from a .22 caliber rifle. Among the 15 fragments, one complete base was perfectly engraved with the number 8. Discovering Harvey's body. Exactly 1 month after Mrs. Crewe's body was found, on September 16, 2 boys were playing by a section of the Waikato River when they suddenly saw a rotting body float up. This body was Mr. Crewe, missing for 3 months. At this point, the Crewe couple's bodies were all found. Like before, divers dove to the river bottom again, trying to find the heavy object on the body. Fortunately, this time the divers found a vehicle axle with both ends cut off. Through this axle's model, it could be determined which car it belonged to. This undoubtedly provided a major clue for solving the case. After forensic examination, Mr. Crewe was also killed by a single headshot. The fatal bullet entered from Mr. Crewe's left rear. After DSIR testing, the bullet also came from a .22 caliber rifle, and the bullet fragments also had the number 8 mark. New clues. After months of stagnation, the police finally had a new breakthrough. Whoever owned a .22 caliber rifle matching the bullet or the car axle was likely the killer. The police found a .22 caliber bullet in each of the Crewe couple's bodies, so the police reinvestigated all previously investigated personnel. Among these, anyone registered with a .22 caliber rifle had to surrender their weapon. Ultimately, the police collected 64 .22 caliber rifles. Through ballistic testing by DSIR, New Zealand's Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, 2 were finally screened from the 64 rifles. Due to severe damage to the residual bullet fragments in the Crewe couple's bodies, it could only be narrowed to this point, temporarily unable to determine which of the 2 it was. 2 suspect gun owners. The owner of one rifle was named Ruth Airy. She was born into a large family in Pukewawa and raised a 10-year-old boy alone. However, this person seemed to have no connection with the Crews, only investigated because her home was within 8 kilometers of the Crewe home. On the evening of June 17th, Airy was at home with several people able to prove it. The owner of the other rifle was named Arthur Allen Thomas. He was a farmer in Pukewawa. His home, 12 kilometers from the Crewe home, originally exceeding the 8-kilometer investigation radius around the Crewe home. The reason he was investigated was that police found out over 10 years ago in Thomas's student days, he had pursued Jeanette, now Mrs. Crewe. But these were old matters. Jeanette and Mr. Crewe had been married 4 years, and Thomas was also married. Thomas's wife was named Vivian Thomas, and she and their tenant could prove Thomas was home that evening of the 17th and didn't go out. Hutton's analysis. At this point, Detective Hutton fell into thought. From the current information, the two .22 caliber rifle owners seemed to have no motive for the crime. Plus, each had an alibi, so their suspicion could basically be ruled out. The one with the strongest motive was Mr. Crewe's father-in-law, Demler, but he had no .22 caliber rifle registered under his name at all. Demler only looked like the killer, but had no substantial evidence to support it. The investigation hit a snag here. But fortunately, the police had another clue, the axle, with both ends cut off, that was tied to Mr. Crewe's body and sunk into the Waikato River. Tracing the axle. Soon the police found the specific model of this axle. It was an original axle from an old sedan. Subsequently, a large photo of this axle was published in New Zealand's TV, newspapers, and media. Everyone was very concerned about the progress of the Pukakawa blood case. On September 20th, Detective Hutton's office phone suddenly rang. The caller was a Pukakawa resident named Keith Cliff. He said he recognized that axle. It was originally his. After hearing this, Detective Hutton immediately went to this person's home to inquire. Cliff told Detective Hutton that this axle was removed from the original car many years ago and installed on an old trailer. But that old trailer was sold to a used car dealership 13 years ago, and where it went after that was unknown. Tracking the trailer. Subsequently, the police tried to find the used car dealership he mentioned, but discovered it had ceased operations many years ago. Thus, the axle clue seemed broken again. After more than 20 days, on October 13th, that morning, Detective Hutton's office phone rang again. The caller was a woman. She said her name was Colleen, Keith Cliff was her stepfather, and she had important clues to provide. Then Colleen told Detective Hutton on the phone that more than 7 years ago, when she was a student, one day on the way to school, she personally saw the old trailer her father had sold. Since that trailer was originally theirs, Colleen was very familiar with it, and definitely not mistaken. She was very impressed because she also knew the driver of that car at the time. He worked at the Thomas farm. The farm owner was Old Thomas, a large farm owner in Pukekawa. That trailer belonged to him. Connecting the clues. Hearing this, Detective Hutton's eyes lit up because the Old Thomas in Colleen's mouth was the father of Arthur Thomas, one of the .22 caliber rifle owners. The gun and axle, these two clues intertwined. Was this just a coincidence? Right after hanging up, Detective Hutton ordered Detective Johnston to rush to the Thomas farm for investigation. Farm owner Old Thomas was very surprised to learn the police were interested in a trailer from many years ago. He admitted he did buy a used trailer from a dealership over 10 years ago, but that trailer later had a major repair, with many parts replaced. Now that trailer is on the farm. After old Thomas's consent, Detective Johnston crawled under the car and looked carefully. Since there was no search warrant, it wasn't convenient for more detailed investigation, so he returned to the station to report to Detective Hutton. Checking the trailer. On the morning of October 14, the police came to the Thomas farm again and straightforwardly asked old Thomas if the trailer's axle had been replaced. Old Thomas said the car was repaired 5 years ago, but he wasn't very clear if the axle was replaced. At the time, this trailer was repaired at a Tuakau garage. Subsequently, Thomas found a repair bill from then, with the repair date written as August 1965. On October 15, the police found the garage where old Thomas replaced parts. The garage owner checked the repair records from that year and found there was indeed a record of replacing parts. Since old Thomas was a regular customer of this garage, the garage owner vaguely recalled the scene from back then. He told the police that the trailer needed many parts replaced, including an axle. Because removing the original axle was troublesome and required some skill, he personally sawed that axle into 3 sections. The police randomly took out the photo of the axle fished from the river bottom to show the garage owner. The owner said from the cutting technique, it looked like what he did. The garage owner added to the police that he wanted to keep the replaced old axle at the garage, but when the trailer was repaired and picked up, it wasn't old Thomas who came, but old Thomas's eldest son, Richard Thomas. He refused the garage owner's request to keep the old axle and took all the replaced old parts back to the Thomas farm. Back to Thomas farm. At 2 p.m., the police came to the Thomas farm for the 3rd time. When old Thomas was asked where the old parts were placed during the trailer repair back then were, old Thomas said he had no idea those old parts were brought back. The one who picked up the car was the eldest son, Richard. Subsequently, old Thomas called his eldest son, Richard, to ask about the whereabouts of the old trailer parts back then. He was told the replaced old parts were all placed in the warehouse on the west side of the farm. These days, the police visited the Thomas farm multiple times, seemingly investigating the axle's whereabouts, but actually also focusing on observing the case's suspect, the .22 caliber rifle owner, 32-year-old Arthur Thomas. When asking his father, old Thomas, he was nearby. Upon hearing the police were looking for those old parts, he seemed very calm and composed. Under his father, old Thomas's instructions, Arthur Thomas led the police to the West warehouse without any panic or hesitation. It seemed he knew nothing about those parts. Requesting bullets from Arthur. After Detective Johnston chatted a few words with Thomas, he made a request to Thomas. He hoped Thomas could provide some .22 caliber bullets he used. Unexpectedly, Thomas agreed right away and immediately went back to the room to get a box of .22 caliber bullets. Subsequently, the police, led by Thomas, went to the west warehouse of the farm for a search. Sure enough, in the warehouse, they found several old trailer parts from the list. However, the police didn't find the most important part, which was the other 2 residual parts after the axle was cut. Before leaving the farm, Detective Johnston took another statement from Thomas. However, this time let Detective Johnston catch the subtle changes in it.
Let's look at Thomas's statements at 3 different time points.
Arthur's changing statements. The first statement's time point was July 3. At that time, Thomas was listed as an investigation subject because he had interacted with Jeanette. In the first statement, Thomas said he was a loading and unloading driver for a company, dispatched to the Crewe home 3 to 4 years ago for work, and was invited into the house for morning and afternoon tea, but hadn't gone since. The second statement's time point was early September. At that time, Thomas's .22 caliber rifle became one of the 2 suspected murder rifles. In the second statement, Thomas said he was a loading and unloading driver for a company dispatched to the Crewe farm about 7 years ago, but the farm manager then wasn't the Crews, but Jack Hancock, and he had meals in the house.
The third statement's time point was October 15, when the police went to the Thomas farm to find old car parts. In the third statement, Thomas said he was a loading and unloading driver, left the company in 1965, had gone to the Crewe farm a few times before that. The residents there were the Hancocks, and he had meals with them a few times.
Statement analysis. In these 3 statements, Thomas was repeatedly asked the same question, whether he had been to the Crewe farm before and if he was familiar with the environment inside. From the before and after 3 statements, it can be seen that Thomas not only went to the Crewe farm multiple times before, but was quite familiar with the environment inside. However, the key is that in the context of different time periods, the answers Thomas gave were constantly changing. Thomas pushed the time of going to the Crewe farm earlier once again, from 3 to 4 years ago to 7 years ago, and changed the originally said Crews to the Hancocks.
Wire clue. On October 20th, the police went to the Thomas farm again and took away a bundle of wires. Through testing, this bundle of wires matched the wires used to bind the Crewe couple's bodies. Wires taken from other places didn't match the wires binding the bodies. This included wires from Demler's home and the other .22 caliber rifle owner, Ruth Airy.
The investigation reaching here, Detective Hutton increasingly suspected this Thomas. At this point, the number 1 suspect in his mind had changed from the original Crewe father-in-law Demler to Thomas. The reason for suspecting Demler before was that from the crime scene and the victim's autopsy reports, it was obviously an acquaintance crime. Otherwise, the scene couldn't have no struggle traces, and the victims couldn't have no other injuries.
However, as other evidence gradually emerged, Detective Hutton realized his original inference might be wrong. At this moment, Detective Hutton looked over all the investigation statements and evidence again and again. He kept asking himself, could all this not be an acquaintance crime? Autopsy report and position. Detective Hutton looked at Crewe's autopsy report again. The bullet entered from the left rear of the head. He recalled Demler had said the armchair had been moved. It wasn't originally in that position. Thinking of this, Detective Hutton quickly found the floor plan of the Crewe crime scene. After looking, his originally furrowed brows relaxed because he already knew how the killer committed the crime. This gave birth to the case's second theory, the shooting from outside the shutter theory. Shooting from outside theory. From the crime scene floor plan, it can be seen that the sliding door between the kitchen
and living room is in this position. During the first scene survey, this sliding door was open, but the armchair position was close to the sliding door. One window in the middle of the kitchen windows was shutters.
During the scene survey, this shutter was open. Outside the window was the back door area. Looking in from outside the window, since the sliding door was open, it directly faced the armchair position. Therefore, the killer could step on the low wall outside the window through the open shutter to shoot Mr. Crewe sitting in the armchair. From the position inference, the bullet would enter the victim's left rear, which matched the autopsy report.
Crime process guess. Hutton inferred that evening the killer shot Mr. Crewe sitting in the armchair from the back door position through the shutter. Subsequently, the killer quickly took the spare key from under the mat outside the back door and entered the Crewe home. At that time, Mrs. Crewe was caring for her daughter in the bedroom, heard the gunshot and went to the living room to check, then met the armed killer in the living room and was shot.
Thinking of this, Detective Hutton immediately dispatched officers back to the Crewe farm to search. This search focused on .22 caliber shell casings. If the killer really killed the victim through the outside shutter theory, then shell casings would certainly be left at the scene. However, the initial searches focused inside the house and found no casings. This search's key area was outside the house, especially near the back door shutter.
Finding the shell casing. Next, the police searched the Crewe farm for a full 2 hours but had no new discoveries. Just as they were about to give up, an officer casually dug up a piece of soil near the back door shutter, unexpectedly finding a shiny shell casing under the soil. This crucially important shell casing became the case's Exhibit 350. The location where this shell casing was found was only a few steps from the shutter outside shooting point. According to DSIR ballistic testing, it was confirmed the dry shell casing belonged to a .22 caliber bullet shell casing, and after multiple tests with the two suspicious rifles, it was determined this bullet head belonged to Thomas's .22 caliber rifle ejection, excluding it from the other Root Aries .22 caliber rifle. It seemed the case was getting closer to the truth. Who is the mysterious woman witness Roddick saw on June 19th? However, one problem remained. Who was the mysterious woman witness Roddick saw on June 19th? If Thomas was the killer, then that mysterious woman was very likely his wife Vivian. If so, everything made sense. On October 30, witness Roddick was invited to the police station again. The police required him to identify from 9 women who the woman was. These 9 women included Thomas's wife, Vivian. Unexpectedly for Hutton, after Roddick carefully observed each one, he didn't identify Thomas's wife, Vivian, or anyone else. If this mysterious woman wasn't Thomas's wife, then who was she? The wrong inference about the mysterious woman troubled Detective Hutton greatly. However, even so, Detective Hutton still firmly believed in the inference that Thomas was the killer. The reason was that in some details the police later grasped, Detective Hutton saw Thomas's motive for killing the Crewe couple. Thomas's motive. In Thomas's student days, he had passionately pursued Jeanette. At that time, many people knew because Thomas was the son of a large farm owner,
So it was quite a stir. Unexpectedly for everyone, Jeanette ultimately rejected Thomas, making Thomas lose face. Later, Jeanette and David Harvey Crewe got married grandly in Pukakawa, while Thomas's embarrassing student days were always used as a joke. Did Thomas turn love to hate, jealous of the Crewe's life, and choose to kill? The reason for this inference was that police found after the Crewe's marriage, some things happened successively at their farm. July 1967, a year after the Crewe's marriage, Jeanette reported a theft at home. Stolen items included handbag, pearl necklace, ring, makeup box, comb, etc. November 1968. After the Crews went out, a room on the farm was set on fire. June 1969, May 28, 1969, according to some sources, the haystack in the Crewe warehouse was set on fire again. However, in these three cases, the police found no suspects because even the Crews themselves didn't know who they had offended. Comb detail. Detective Hutton keenly noticed the details. On the list of items from the Crewe home world before, a comb was clearly written. A comb is worthless. Why would a thief steal a comb? According to the records from the report back then, Mrs. Crewe said this comb was given to her by someone named Thomas in student days. After learning this information, Detective Hutton immediately flipped through the on-site survey report from the Crewe home a few months ago. On the item list, there was actually a comb, and this comb's appearance was identical to the comb described by Mrs. Crewe when stolen at home. So the question was, why did this comb, stolen 3 years ago, return to the Crewe home after 3 years? Perhaps Thomas had been obsessed with Jeanette through many years, and after Jeanette married David Harvey Crewe, he was even more jealous, so he killed the couple to vent anger. After the crime, he left the comb he gave in student days at the scene as a memorial. Arresting Thomas. At this point, Thomas's motive had surfaced. The murder gun was Thomas's. He was also familiar with the Crewe home terrain. The binding wires and sinking axle both came from the Thomas farm, so no matter how you look, he most resembled the killer. On November 11, suspect Arthur Thomas was arrested at home. On December 22, Arthur Thomas was formally prosecuted by the police for 2 counts of murder, murdering David Harvey Crewe and Jeanette Crewe. Court battle upcoming. Next, a court drama was about to unfold. The prosecution and defense engaged in intense debate, and the process was quite exciting. Half a year after the case, on February 15, 1971, the Auckland High Court opened the trial for this case. Defendant Arthur Thomas was accused of double murder. Defense arguments. The defense lawyer argued Thomas was innocent based on the following points. First, the prosecution's proposed motive for Thomas was far-fetched. Harming the Crews brought no benefit to Thomas. Instead, Jeanette's father Demler had more motive because Demler was the direct beneficiary after the Crews' confirmed death, and Demler's various strange behaviors after the case were very suspicious. Second, Thomas was at home that evening of the incident and didn't go out. Wife Vivian and their tenant could prove it, so the defendant had an alibi. Third theory, Ruth Irie murder theory. Next, the defense lawyer proposed the case's third theory in court, the Ruth Irie murder theory, Ruth Irie was the other .22 rifle owner. She raised a 10-year-old son alone. This boy always liked carrying the home .22 rifle, wandering and playing between various Pukakawa farms. Locals knew him. On the evening of June 17th, the boy came to the Crewe farm, so Mrs. Crewe invited him in for dinner. During this, some unpleasantness occurred. The boy, in anger, shot and killed the Crews. Then he went home and told Ruth. Ruth, to cover her son's crime, went back to the farm to handle the bodies. The reason she didn't kill Jeanette's 18-month-old daughter was compassion as a mother and cared for her in the following days. On the 19th, she was seen by witness Roddick. Ruth's son used to wander daily between farms and knew every Pukekohe household inside out. So he knew the Thomas farm had wires and axles. Mother Ruth used these to bind and sink the bodies. Prosecution's rebuttal. The prosecution couldn't help laughing after hearing the defense's so-called Ruth Irie murder theory because witness Roddick had already identified Ruth Irie. She wasn't the mysterious woman he saw on June 19. Next, the prosecution listed some evidence. 1. The wires and sinking axle used to bind David Crew's body came from the Thomas farm. 2. Based on the bullet ballistic test in the victims' heads, among the two suspected .22 rifles, one owner was Thomas. 3. A .22 bullet shell casing was found at the Crewe farm, which was the case's exhibit 350. Testing showed this shell casing could only have been left after firing from Thomas's .22 rifle. First trial result. Among the evidence listed by the prosecution, Exhibit 350 was the most fatal. On March 2nd, the court ruled Arthur Thomas guilty of double murder, sentenced to life imprisonment. After Thomas lost the case, wife Vivian, unable to bear the constant harassment and abuse from locals, soon announced divorce from Thomas. In prison, Thomas insisted he was wronged and sought appeal, but it was rejected by the court. Support from media. An Auckland newspaper had a columnist named Pat Booth who believed Thomas was innocent and raised funds for Thomas to hire a famous lawyer. After collecting evidence from multiple sides, he reapplied to the court for litigation and finally got accepted. On March 26, 1973, 2 years after the first verdict, the second trial began. Attacking the outside shooting theory. Right away, the defense lawyer unceremoniously pointed out the police's so-called outside shutter shooting theory had many loopholes. In this theory, the killer must have one foot on the low wall at the back door, the other on the windowsill to shoot. However, from the crime scene photos, there was a screen door outside the back door. This screen door was open at the time, blocking right in front of the adjacent low wall, making shooting impossible. At this point, the defense lawyer requested a witness to testify. This witness was a Crewe neighbor who said when passing by on the morning of June 22, he saw the Crewe home back door, screen door opening outward, consistent with the screen door state in the photos. On June 22 afternoon, the police received the report and went to the Crewe farm, while this neighbor saw it when passing in the morning, earlier than the police.
The defense lawyer continued that even if the scene met the conditions of the so-called outside shutter shooting theory, there was still a factor that couldn't be ignored: the weather that night. The incident date, June 17th evening, was cold, damp, and windy. In such weather, the Crewe kitchen shutter was open. Not only that, Mr. Crewe was sitting in the armchair facing the wind. How likely was that? The low wall outside the shutter was only 4 inches wide. The distance from low wall to windowsill was 33 inches. On a slippery-footed, low-visibility night, it was difficult for a person to stand steady and had to be quiet without being discovered. Then complete accurate shooting after reaching the designated position. The difficulty was quite high. Weather factor. Subsequently, the defense lawyer called a military expert. The defense lawyer asked him how difficult it was to complete the outside shutter shooting theory. The expert said untrained, ordinary people couldn't do it. The defense lawyer said the prosecution's so-called outside shutter shooting theory was a completely untenable wrong theory. Judging a person's guilt through a wrong theory was simply absurd. Fourth theory, Jeanette murder-suicide theory. The defense lawyer explained the case's fourth theory to the court, the Jeanette murder-suicide theory. The defense lawyer believed the Crewe couple's life wasn't as happy as outsiders saw. Jeanette had long endured domestic violence from David Harvey Crewe. On the evening of June 17, 1970, the intolerable Jeanette shot her husband. In panic, she found her father, Dimmler, to help handle the body together. In the following days, Jeanette fell into fear, guilt, and despair, ultimately choosing to shoot herself at home. Later, Dimmler came home and found his daughter had suicided. To cover the truth of his daughter killing her husband, he handled his daughter's body the same way, faking it as both being killed. On June 19th, the mysterious woman witness Roddick saw at the Crewe door was Jeanette herself. This explained why Jeanette's daughter wasn't killed. Debating shell casing 350. In the first trial, Thomas was convicted mainly based on a .22 bullet shell casing found near the Crewe back door, which was the case's Exhibit 350. This shell casing had uniqueness. It could only come from Thomas's .22 rifle. Therefore, in the first trial, Thomas was found guilty. To this, the defense lawyer raised objection. Exhibit 350 could only prove one thing, that the shell casing was dropped after firing from Thomas's .22 rifle, but couldn't prove this shell casing matched the bullets that shot the Crews. Next, the defense lawyer called crime identification expert Dr. Jen Sprott. Sprott said the bullet heads in the Crewe couple's heads were the case's exhibits 234 and 289. Both bullet head bases were engraved with the number 8 mark. .22 bullets with number 8 marks were produced by the CAC Ammunition Factory in Auckland from 1948 to 1963. After that, they were completely discontinued. Later produced were new .22 bullets. The biggest difference from old .22 bullets was that the new bullet head bases no longer had the number 8 mark. Distinguishing new and old bullets.
We know that after a bullet is fired, the head shoots into the target while the shell casing ejects from the gun, and only shell casings were found near the Crewe home back door. Unless this shell casing and the bullet heads in the Crewe couple's heads belong to the same bullet, it could be used as evidence.
Subsequently, the defense lawyer gave more favorable evidence in court. It turned out that when the CAC factory produced new .22 bullets, not only did they update the head mold, removing the number 8 mark on the base, but also updated the shell casing mold. Although superficially indistinguishable to the naked eye, there were actually tiny differences. Sprott showed a photo to the court, displaying the bottom features of new .22 bullets and old .22 bullets. It can be seen that whether new or old, the bottom should have the 3 English letters ICI. Unable to analyze with the naked eye whether it's new or old bullets, Sprott said it could be distinguished with a microscope. He pointed out that under microscope observation and comparison, the letter C on old shell casings is 1.22 millimeters higher than the I letters on both sides, while on new shell casings, the letter C is 1.57 millimeters higher than the I letters on both sides. Therefore, new and old .22 bullets can be distinguished through the extremely tiny height difference of the letter C on the shell casing. DSIR subsequently remeasured Exhibit 350, confirming this statement. The Exhibit 350 found near the Crewe back door belonged to a new shell casing, while the bullet heads in the Crewe couple's heads were old .22 bullet heads. The two didn't belong to the same bullet at all. Challenge from prosecution. The problem then became simple. Unless the prosecution found special cases in CAC-produced .22 bullets using new shell casings with old bullet heads, the defense's inference about new and old bullets stood. Next, the focus gathered on the case's Exhibit 343. This was a .22 bullet found in Thomas's brother Peter Thomas's storage room. This was a complete bullet with the bullet head base engraved with number 8. Forensic expert Dr. Sprott first tested Exhibit 343. The test results showed this bullet was old shell casing plus old bullet head, not a special case. Subsequently, DSIR retested Exhibit 343, but the result was vastly different. The test showed this bullet was new shell casing plus old bullet head. This Exhibit 343 bullet was a special case. Third check. With 2 completely different test reports for the same exhibit, the judge couldn't tolerate it, so the court invited a third-party identification agency to retest Exhibit 343 in court. Under strict supervision, Exhibit 343 was rigorously tested again. The test results showed Exhibit 343 belonged to new shell casing plus old bullet head, consistent with the prosecution's test result. This bullet was a special case. Seeing this result, the defense was stunned. The prosecution pressed on, demanding in court that the court file a case to investigate defense expert Sprott because he gave false testimony, tampered with test results, and obstructed judicial fairness. The defense claimed someone swapped the exhibit. For a time, both sides stuck to their opinions. New evidence from witness. Subsequently, the defense found an important witness, Detective Keith. That day, he brought Exhibit 343 back to the station. At the time, Detective Hutton was eager for results and felt directly removing the bullet head was unsafe.
so he first took photos for evidence, then used Thomas's .22 rifle for test firing. Ultimately, found Exhibit 343's bullet head also had number 8. Note that such operation didn't comply with procedure. In court, Detective Hutton firmly denied this statement, saying it had been too long and he didn't remember clearly. Helplessly, the judge announced indefinite adjournment. Then, not long after, the prosecutor suddenly presented a whole box of SAC-manufactured .22 bullets to the court. These bullets' shell casings all met new standards, with letter C 1.57 millimeters higher than the I letters on both sides, while the bullet heads used were all old type engraved with number 8. As soon as the evidence came out, the plot reversed again. This powerful evidence directly overturned defense expert Sprott's theory. Subsequently, the jury quickly reached consensus. The judge ruled Arthur Thomas guilty of double murder, upholding the original first trial sentence of life imprisonment. Continuing appeals. However, at this time, Thomas's defense lawyer didn't give up and continued seeking appeals. After being continuously rejected by courts, in anger, he appealed to the New Zealand Governor-General. Under public opinion pressure at the time, the New Zealand Governor-General required the appeal court to accept the defense lawyer's appeal. On approximately 1975, after discussion, 5 judges unanimously ruled the appeal court upheld the original judgment. However, the defense lawyer still refused to give up. 3 years later, in 1978, he directly appealed to the London Privy Council, requesting retrial. New Zealand is a Commonwealth country, so the London Privy Council is the ultimate appeal route for Commonwealth countries. However, the London Privy Council stated that for accusations involving New Zealand judicial system personnel, the Privy Council had no jurisdiction. The case was not accepted. Public opinion and book. Although at this time the courts believed the case evidence was solid with no doubt, folk exploration and discussion never stopped. A British writer living in Sydney named David Yallop took great interest in this case from Thomas's second trial. So in 1978, he published a novel called Beyond Reasonable Doubt. This novel was based on the Pukakawa case prototype. This book achieved huge sales in New Zealand and Australia. More and more people knew about this and expressed strong dissatisfaction with the police's handling, demanding retrial. Author Yallop also found witness Roddick and showed him 16 photos, letting Roddick identify who among them was the mysterious woman. Roddick immediately selected number 11, saying it was too similar. Later, Roddick selected another number 7, saying number 7's clothes were the same as the woman he saw that day, but the appearance wasn't very similar. Although this was an unofficial folk investigation, because Yallop's novel was too best-selling, this matter soon spread nationwide. Fifth theory. Yallop claimed he investigated the most likely person, then mixed that person's photo into 15 unrelated photos, letting Roddick choose. Sure enough, Roddick selected that woman on the first try. However, Yallop was unwilling to disclose this woman's name. A columnist named Chris Burt saw it and guessed who the woman Yallop was unwilling to disclose was. So in his column article, he explained the case's fifth theory, Demler Murder Theory 2. Demler Murder Theory 1 was proposed by Detective Hutton, so Demler Murder Theory 2 was used to distinguish. A few years after Jeanette was killed, Demler remarried. Folk organizations conducted secret investigations on him. Demler's second wife claimed she came to Pukekawa after 1972 and had never been before. However, after in-depth investigation, she was found lying. Evidence showed she had been to Pukekawa the year before the case, 1969, when Demler's first wife Maisie was still alive. Columnist Bert believed Demler killed his daughter and son-in-law to get their property. The Crewe couple's daughter was only 18 months old, so after their death, Demler was the direct beneficiary. The mysterious woman witness Roddick saw was Demler's second wife. High-level intervention. With more and more media and people discussing this, it finally caught the attention of New Zealand Prime Minister Robert Muldoon. On January 6, 1979, he announced the establishment of a Royal Special Investigation Commission to retry the case. Sprott's return. After 6 years since the second trial, defense forensic expert Dr. Sprott returned with determination to win. In these 6 years, Sprott dreamed of researching every batch of .22 bullets produced by CAC Factory. In court, Dr. Sprott slowly stood up. He said there was no such thing as the special case the prosecution took out a whole box of .22 bullets in the second trial, all using new shell casings plus old bullet heads. Sprott pointed out that in this batch's shell casing bottom engraving, C was indeed 1.57 millimeters higher than the sides. However, besides this batch of bullets had a new feature. The upper picture is Exhibit 350 found at the Crewe back door. The lower is the so-called Special Exhibit 343. Through comparison, it can be found that in Exhibit 343, the two I letters are farther from letter C. Therefore, the Exhibit 350 dropped at the scene is a new bullet casing. It wasn't the bullet casing that killed the Crews. Accepting evidence. With further testing, the court accepted this evidence. However, the prosecution said even if Exhibit 350 didn't belong to the shell casing of the bullet that shot the Crews, it couldn't prove Thomas was innocent. The Crewe neighbor, Mrs. Priest, heard 3 gunshots on the evening of June 17th. However, the scene had no bullet holes or heads to prove the third bullet's existence. What situation would have the killer fire 3 shots, take away 2 shell casings and 1 bullet head, but insist on leaving the third shell casing at the scene to provide clues to the police? Accusing the police. The defense lawyer believed Detective Hutton and his assistant Johnston conspired to forge evidence to frame Thomas. The defense lawyer continued that when Detective Hutton proposed the outside shutter shooting theory, he had done simulated shooting tests at the crime scene to confirm this possibility. So why didn't Detective Hutton search for this shell casing on the simulated test day, but order the search 2 weeks later? Note that Detective Hutton was a quite experienced professional criminal investigator. How could he suddenly react slowly and commit such a low-level mistake? That's because before ordering the shell casing search at the Crewe home, There had already been 2 large-scale searches, and the search area was outside the house.
Doing so at the time was to search for the crew's whereabouts or possible burial sites, so Team Hutton wasn't reacting slowly, but knew clearly the outside had been searched already. So why do it again? Priest witness. Subsequently, the Polish Owen priest and his wife took the witness stand and began describing their experience one day in late October of the incident year. One afternoon, the priest couple went out from home. While walking on the road, they suddenly heard 2 gunshots. The shots came from the Crewe backyard. Due to the previous incident, they were sensitive to gunshots and went together to check. So they saw Detective Hutton and Assistant Johnston. It turned out they were test firing 2 shots at the Crewe home. Evidence against police. Subsequently, in court, the defense continued to find massive evidence and witnesses to prove Detective Hutton and his assistant Johnston forged evidence. The process was very complex, with dozens of rounds back and forth. Ultimately, the court determined Detective Hutton and Assistant Johnston indeed suspected of perjury, making the original evidence unreliable. This gave birth to the case's 6th theory, the investigating officer's murder theory. If wanting to enter someone's home at night, besides acquaintances, it could also be officers. If the killer was an officer, after killing could participate in the investigation, then the entire investigation direction would advance toward the killer's desired direction, certainly getting farther from the truth. Illogical points. The defense lawyer proposed that if Thomas was the killer, the photos of the axle used for sinking had already been in newspapers and TV. Thomas couldn't not know. In the situation, why didn't Thomas hide the axle or find a way to destroy it, but actively cooperated with police searching the warehouse? This didn't make sense. The trailer repair and axle replacement only old Thomas and eldest son Richard knew. No evidence showed Thomas knew there was a discarded axle in the warehouse. Evidence showed the axle modified on the trailer and the sinking weight axle were very likely not the same. The initial owner of the sinking weight axle himself modified the axle on the trailer. Subsequently, the trailer was sold, but no one could prove it. Therefore, Thomas was step by step forcibly made the defendant. Another detail. At the time, old Thomas handed all original bills, receipts, and list about the trailer repair to Officer Johnston. However, such important evidence was lost by the police.
Whether really lost or lost was very suspicious. Officer Johnston, who got this evidence, had died in 1978. The death time was exactly when Beyond Reasonable Doubt book was popular. This book's core was analyzing how police perjured. What connection there was is unknown. However, now its dead men tell no tales.
Commission conclusion. Ultimately, the Royal Investigation Commission determined the 3 important exhibits pointing to Arthur Thomas' murder, Exhibit 350, sinking weight axle, and binding wires, all didn't hold. At the end of 1979, then New Zealand Prime Minister Robert Muldoon announced a royal pardon, pardoning Arthur Thomas.
After 9 years in prison, he finally regained freedom. The mystery remains and recent updates. So who was the killer of the Crewe couple? Was it the people mentioned in the story or someone else? This obviously became a mystery that could never be solved.